EdTech Mondays Africa is supported by the MasterCard Foundation Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning and is part of the Young Africa Works programming.
Hello and welcome to this edition of EdTech Mondays Africa. My name is Joy Doreen Bira. It's so good to have you joining us on yet another edition where we are talking about investing in government data systems to drive decision making. As UNESCO reports, there are widespread concerns that learning outcomes do not match expansion of education because many countries lack systematic data on who is learning and who is not. Government data, UNESCO says, can be used to identify underserved or underperforming learners, helping to develop practical solutions. Data can be used to hold the system accountable for the use of resources by showing whether increased public investment in education has resulted in measurable gains in student achievement. Lack of investment in data collection systems can lead to poor monitoring of education, resulting in inadequate interventions to improve learning outcomes. But using data to track student progress helps in identifying learning gaps and evaluate the effectiveness of digital tools, enabling educators and policymakers to make informed decisions on technology adoption, personalized learning, and funding allocation. To this end, we seek to review the 2024 EdTech Conference Recommendation No, which is focused on driving decisions with data by investing in government systems and capabilities for timely collection, analysis, and informed decision-making. How can investment decisions promote accountability and provide clear and measurable indicators of performance? How will it build trust among stakeholders, including students, parents, and educators? How can investments in government data systems reveal disparities in educational access and outcomes? My panelists for this conversation, Petrine Banda Chilala, who is the Assistant Director, Early Childhood Education, Ministry of Education in Zambia. We also have Robin Njiru, Public Sector Lead, West, East, and Central Africa at Amazon Web Services, also known as AWS. And in his role, he drives innovation in government, healthcare, education, and non-profit organizations. We also have Inyang Umoran, who is the project manager at the Association for the Development of Education in Africa, ADEA, where she leads the implementation of the 30-country Education and Skills Data Challenge project. We also have with us in studio Alice Munyoa, who is the Senior Director at Mozilla Corporation, and she's the founder of the African Women in Artificial Intelligence. She has led African government engagement in the African Union Commission's .Africa initiative. Great to have you all joining us on this edition. What would you say is the reason governments are not putting data to good use where decision-making is concerned?
As we engage with multiple governments, especially across sub-Saharan Africa, we see some very interesting trends. So to a point that has been pretty prevalent everywhere, there is no shortage of data. Every single day, data is being generated in different parts of the world, and especially on a continent like ours where more and more people are getting online, especially because of mobile telephony, there is actually no shortage of data. However, that data is sitting in all kinds of disparate spaces. And then when we come into governments, again, the level of adoption of technology across multiple governments is very, number one, siloed, and again, also disparate. We find different governments adopting. We have governments in Africa that are adopting technology at a very accelerated pace. And then others, because of various challenges and limitations, are then also adopting it at a much slower pace. And then this further trickles down. When you look at these countries, you find that the capital cities and more or less what you would call the urban areas seem to then sort of have an advantage compared to the rest of the regions. With this kind of different setups, you find that being able to then have a single view of information around education becomes pretty much impossible. And therefore, whereas, yes, that is the utopia we want to eventually get to, our reality right now is that today, government data on education is sitting on all kinds of silos. And it is more a journey than a destination, no matter which point you look at it from.
When I worked with government, I served in the late Kibaki's government for about 25 years. And it's during his time that we actually started I think Kenya was the first country in the world to start the Open Government Data Project. I don't know what happened. It no longer exists. But we do know that especially governments across the world, not just African governments, hold the controllers and processors of the largest amounts of data around the world. Why we don't use them? Several reasons. When I worked with government information was considered secret. In fact, I remember having to sign the Secrecy Act when I got appointed to the board of the Communications Commission of Kenya. Because we actually really believed that government data was secret. There's also the notion of sovereignty in terms of why should we be putting out our government data? Because government data is public data. Who's holding it? There's that fear of where is it going? Who's using it? How is it being used? And that's also because the African continent was last to get into this. I mean, just like we were last to get industrialized, we were also the last to get completely into the technology ecosystem. And it's actually, for me, it's a good thing because it means that we are going to go into this being very careful about all the mistakes that are being made by all the other regions, and then say, nope, that is not what we're going to be doing with our data. Or this is not how we should be collecting or storing our data. We'll do it differently from what Europe is doing or Asia or the other parts of the world.
I like that you talked about privacy, but also the fact that we have the opportunity to do things differently. Speaking of privacy, Patrine, I want to come to you because this data is available. Why are we not putting it to good use?
One thing we should understand is that government has a lot of procedures and the bureaucracy. So that process also takes time for the data to be known and to be used, because there are certain people who are designated to give information and not everyone can divulge any information. So those processes also delay the information to reach to the intended purpose. But so far, like speaking on behalf of my government, I think we have learned, because now we have an institution called Zamstat, Smart Zambia, where at least data is gathered, but that is speaking on behalf of government. So those are, I think that is one of the reasons that I can bring forth, that the bureaucracy itself and the procedures, because not everyone is allowed to give data. That could be one of the reasons to delay.
Inyang, coming to you, knowing that what Patrine has said pretty much affects the work that you're doing, what do you think of this?
Like you mentioned, it's true. There are a lot of countries that have a lot of data, right? But then there is a shortage of capacity to even draw insights from that data. And in some instances, you would have cases where, because the data is not collected in a timely manner or reported in a timely manner, by the time the reports are out, the issues that the data would have helped solve have moved to a different level. So maybe have worsened, in which case you need more data to understand the new situation and be able to address it. So there's a problem around timeliness of data. There's a problem around data insights. Oftentimes, yes, research is really important to be able to draw information, to draw insights from the data that's coming through, and then applying it for reforms that need to happen in the system. But then oftentimes within the ministries, within the government systems, that capacity, whether it's in terms of time or in terms of technical capacity to draw those data insights are in short supply. So that's also one of the reasons why you'd have a whole, box full of data, but then there is limited capacity to translate that data into actionable insights that can actually drive change in the systems.
And speaking of actionable data, I want to come back to you, Patrine, because I think it's important for us to understand how data is currently being used by governments like yours, because you did hint at, but you also mentioned that, it's the carefulness with which you're handling the data that also needs to be considered. How do you analyze the data that you receive? Because I'm assuming that you collect data about different, areas of the education ecosystem. But how exactly do you analyze, and then how do you get to the point and say we can use this information we've collected to inform decisions on, say, early childhood development or any other area of education?
One area we are using to analyze data, we are using the Education Statistical Bulletin, ESB. This Education Statistical Bulletin is published to inform policymakers, stakeholders, and the public. And this Education Statistical Bulletin is produced yearly. Yeah, so you find that this bulletin has a lot of information in it, be it information concerning early childhood education in terms of enrollments, in terms of teachers that we have, and where could be the challenge, and where could we have the shortfall, so to speak. We also have statistical and the trade analysis, where I'm talking of using the MEC. But we are in a process. We started using it at a point, but now we want to improve it so that it can be speaking to the data that we want as a ministry. Then we have also dashboard and real-time monitoring. So on this data, we have the digital dashboard for policymakers to track key indicators. For example, we have a race read program that was tracking the performance of our learners from grade 1 to 3 and tracking them in terms of early literacy and numeracy.
Thanks a lot for that, Patrine. And Robin, I want to come to you because we also need to understand the fact that one of government's fears is the data privacy. How are we dealing with data privacy where AWS is concerned? For example, with the relations you have with the different African governments, how are you dealing with that? And how are you assuring governments that this data is not going to be mishandled?
As I answer that, let me just step back into one of the responses that was shared around especially how governments then get to leverage the data. We've as part of what we do, we say that our mission is to be Earth's most customer-centric company or organization. And when it comes to education specifically, we see two primary customers. That's the learner and the educator. And therefore, even as I think about policy-making decisions, when I think about how we extract the data, we are keen to keep the learner and the educator at the center of every conversation. So that, yes, it's great for us as decision makers to come and chime in, but it really has to be about improving and accelerating their own experience. When it comes to privacy, we find that it's one of the 3 or 4 interchangeable words that sometimes are used wrongly. Someone uses privacy, someone else uses security, someone else uses sovereignty, and a fourth word we keep using is localization, and they're used very interchangeably, and sometimes they mean very different things. As we engage government, so first and foremost, as we develop our platform and solutions, we develop them with security as what we call job zero, meaning that everything is securely engaged in, and then we call it a shared responsibility, so that we want all our customers, as they get onto our platforms, whether it's governments, whether it's private organizations, to really work with us on the premise of absolute confidence and trust. And when you look at some of our customers, even outside of education, we're talking about data that is classified as high secret or super secret, to use the term that was used earlier. And we are working with intelligence systems in government, we're working with defense forces. And therefore, when it comes back to education, I think we are finding that the work we have to do, especially, I like to come back to Africa, is that we're working more around educating governments on really how to ensure that the policies in country actually work to support and enhance what they need to intend. Good example, we've worked with governments that I think at first were setting in place policies that were talking about what they call data localization, which essentially meant all data needs to reside within their borders. But you would then sit with someone else in the same government who tells you that they see themselves as a regional data hub. And so we would then be interested in a conversation around, if everyone is keen on restricting, how then do you become a hub? And therefore, even as we talk about data privacy, data security, and sovereignty, we also must open up ourselves to what we call cross-border data flows, so that then not all infrastructure will sit or reside within a country for all manner of reasons. But as long as we are assured of the privacy, of the security, and the sovereignty of this kind of data.
Right. And as we talk about the sovereignty, the security, the privacy, where does accuracy fall in all of this? Because it's one thing for us to talk about sovereignty and all these things, but what about the accuracy to inform the right decisions?
Depending on what you're going to put into the system is not is not a magical solution. It's actually going to really feed you back on what you've put into it. So case in point, we've worked with governments that are at pretty advanced levels of what they need to achieve. As I listened to our director colleague and bring up the electronic management information systems, we are working with governments that have pretty established education exchanges where every single learner in that country is visible and they are viewed in as a single view. In that kind of a country, it doesn't matter whether you're in K-12, in tertiary, in TVETs, you will be viewed as one individual. Whereas in other countries, sometimes in K-12, if a student moves from one school to the next, they're viewed as two different individuals. Right. And then this runs the risk of making erratic decisions. So we are driving the conversation around not just the right data, but also putting in place systems that speak to each other. And then so that by the time we're doing what we call data analytics, we are actually analyzing data that is correct. Otherwise, then we run the risk of making decisions that then don't really give us any insights.
Inyang, you're running this 30-country project on tackling the education and skills data challenge across Africa. How important is it that the information you're receiving is exactly what countries are sharing with you, and not that, in the name of protecting sovereignty and protecting privacy and all that, it then in turn affects the work that you're doing? So how important is it that you receive accurate information?
In terms of accurate information, one of the things that the project, which is aiming to support these 30 countries to improve their production and utilization of quality data. So yes, again, the key word for the project is quality data, right? So we are supporting these countries to provide quality data on education and skills for informed decision-making in policy, planning, program implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. So really, quality here is key. So accuracy is key. But we are looking at it mostly from the country's perspective of what within their system needs to be strengthened. What capacity within their system needs to be strengthened to be able to provide that quality data. So in different countries, different countries are at different levels of quality data production, right? And being that the project is designed to be very priority focused, so national priority focus, you would find that there are some countries that want to strengthen their data analysis system. They want to strengthen their monitoring system, like quality assuring the data that's flowing through from schools to the central level for reporting. So the project is working with the government at different levels, with their different needs, but then obviously trying to support them to strengthen the systems, to build capacity within the system to ensure that quality data is coming through in a timely manner as well. So we are also advocating and supporting countries around whether it's legal policy frameworks, like, the talk around security and privacy. In a number of countries, almost all the countries have policies around this privacy issue, right? Even within the norms and standards that ADIA has supported countries to develop and generally applicable to all African countries, statistical confidentiality is a key component, is one of the norms. So countries are called to account on those terms. And then from an advocacy point of view, we endeavor to encourage more government to abide by those, to enforce those policies that they've put in place around privacy. And also generally ensuring that, the accuracy of the data is also key in the submissions that's made through the data system.
Alice, coming to you now, and just tying into what Inyang has said, how do we ensure that we are putting governments at a level of ease so that they can be able to share this information with whoever needs it? Because I'm just looking at ADARE, for example. They need this information so they can be able to share across the African governments and say, okay, at the next African Union summit, they can be able to say, we've been able to source this data. Can it be used to make decisions around education and skills for Africa's young people? But then again, there are concerns around maybe innovators being able to mishandle this data that they get from the governments. What measures can we put in place to put governments at ease and say, look, I think there's no need for you guys to worry. All we need this data for is to make informed decisions around innovation, around skills and data, and around all of that. Based on the work that you've been able to do at Mozilla Corporation, how best would you encourage and advise governments to go about this?
The first thing usually is, just getting political buy-in. That's usually the biggest hurdle when it comes to because governments are political. Encouraging them to actually make this data available in a way that could be used by entrepreneurs or innovators to create not just jobs, but to create systems that are truly African. Because the biggest issue I see, especially with our continent, is we've been copy-pasting technology, including in the education sector, in all the sectors. We copy-paste technology from the West. And I'm a true believer of what Dr. Nanjala says, that for technology to work in a community, you have to actually understand that society. So you can't create a technology solution looking for a problem, like a lot of the startups and entrepreneurs, the so-called Silicon Savannah, have been doing for years. We did empirical study around that actually shows that what is happening. And so it's encouraging governments, like what we did in terms of open, make available government data, make sure that it's open source, such that as many people as possible can actually go in there and verify whether it's accurate or not. I truly believe, and it's not just because Mozilla is all about open source, but I truly believe that open source is the best way to go in terms of ensuring that we're creating opportunities for us to collect data in an ethical way, to ensure that we are storing it in a way that that is also ethical and not creating a honeypot for malicious actors. Ensure that it's decentralized as well. So if governments know that, the whole idea of centralized data is actually quite dangerous, as like we were trying to do with Huduma number, those who can remember. So decentralizing that is extremely important so that there's no one point of failure. It's a tool for identifying or for collecting data in an ethical way and making it available for decision making.
I love that. And based on your experience, I'm thinking that you have different approaches to these different African governments, because our fragmentation does not allow for one size fits all across the African continent. But Robin, I want to come to you as well, just to hear your thoughts around whether or not you think data solutions can be customized to fit specific needs of local education systems. So how do we make sure that we're trying to pull these data solutions to fit the specific local education systems of the countries?
At times, there is a focus on the process and not so much on the outcome. We have a concept at AWS called working backwards from the customer outcome. I've seen, as we've worked with different governments, any top government in Africa, as we've worked with them, I've seen that even when it comes to education, governments are willing to share their information when they're clear about what is the intended outcome because so that then it's not just a focus of we want your data and then we will come back to you. It's about really jointly working together to be able then to work towards a certain outcome. I'll give you an example. I think mid last year, we ran a proof of concept with one of the top West African governments around broadening access to education by leveraging generative AI-based teaching assistant. 2020, when we worked, and this time I think we have liberty to mention, when we worked with the government of Egypt, everyone knew what happened. But in 4 days, the government of Egypt had clarity. They needed to put their curriculum onto a platform that would enable them to access all their students. At that time, I think it was about 22 million students. In less than a week, we had moved the entire curriculum in 4 days, we had moved it onto on AWS cloud platform, and students across Egypt and Egyptians outside of the country were able to continue learning. So when governments have confidence that we are driving a jointly intended outcome, then there's less lethargy in terms of releasing information.
Is there particular training that you have to do or offer to some of these countries to allow them insight into how exactly to use some of these technologies? Because I think even when they're sourcing for information or data, sometimes the challenge is not much about that there's no data, is that the data is available, but how to access it can also be another challenge.
This is not a one-off process. We will have to continuously train and make available. And this is why, like for us, we have a lot of curriculum that is available today free of charge for tertiary and K-12 level of institutions, so that then this is not a concept that people will come and they need to pay something to be able to access it. This we are seeing, and the reason we are celebrating this, and particularly in Africa, is that it does two things. Number one, we are finding that then students in a K-12 institution or a university are able to get the same level of access that someone in the West is accessing. But secondly, and more interestingly for us, we're finding that, and this we kicked off during COVID, we found young, underserved Kenyans accessing global jobs significantly outside of their borders. And this is exciting for us.
Inyang, I'm coming to you now. Because of the work you're doing at ADARE, I can imagine how much you have to deal with 30 African countries, different contexts, very fragmented, I should say, and different operational systems. What would you say is the biggest need right now where data or investment in data is concerned? Because we have the technology companies here that can tap into some of this advice that you could offer to not just the governments, but also to the tech companies.
Joy, just as you've mentioned, 30 countries. Thankfully, we're still in the first phase where we are working with 11 countries. So this is, the 30 countries is incremental. So over the next 4 years, we would reach 30 countries. So currently we have the first cohort of 11 countries, and we're also bringing on board more countries this year. In terms of investment, there are countries where, like we said earlier, there's a lot of data, but then there's the data insight, right? Is the data insights for reforms that need to happen. But then the real change we want in learning outcomes, you really need to dig into the data a little more to get that. So investment into data analysis tools and really strengthen capacity within the government systems to do this so that there's more ownership. Because you also have instances where these data analysis are supported by, there's obviously the room for development partners to support, but there's also value in having more people within the government system actually see this for themselves, build capacity within the government systems for data analysis, for data insights. There's also countries that are still around, ensuring quality data is coming through from the school level. Right. So there's investment in even strengthening systems at school level to be able to ensure that the data that's going onto the system is accurate, right? So that you have the quality data that's going. And sometimes it's also a thing around, there's also the importance of creating awareness, right? So there's the capacity to enter accurate data. There's also the awareness that needs to happen on the importance, because sometimes at school level, there's a missing link. There's also the privacy issue, the data privacy issue that needs to be in instances where the ministries of education need to have stronger systems, need to have like a cloud server that they are fully responsible for, not outsourcing it to a third party, because obviously a third party also means, room for confidentiality issues. So how do we invest in those systems to ensure that the data is protected? But then at the center of it is also the investment for assessments on learning outcomes. A lot of investment is needed in that angle for countries to be able to collect data on learning outcomes, to be able to link them to the needs of the children, and also how the reforms can then be put in place to address those needs. Some countries have different platforms. So there's a different platform collecting teacher education, teacher information. There's a different platform for learning assessment. There's a different platform for school management information. How do we bring all those together to ensure that the people, the high level of officials that are making decisions are able to see everything holistically and be able to make decisions that allow for, the interconnectivity that needs to happen across the system.
Do you think we're going to get to a point where, for example, we are seeing integration of data the same way we're having the economic bloc integration of business? We have ECOWAS, we have SADC, we have the East African community. Are we seeing that kind of integration of data happening on an education front, or is this like a far-fetched pipeline dream?
We're going to have a platform where we are collecting and trying to pull together all of this data, the different systems across different countries, right? Pulling all of this into one platform that would be easy for a one-stop portal for data around African education systems. But this obviously really would leverage the government. We need the governments to bring the data for us to put on that platform. So the first thing is actually ensuring that the data that's coming through is that quality data that's needed. And then we create a platform for the data to come together. I think that there's a lot of peer learning that currently happens across countries, and we are expanding for that to continue to happen, and also being able to bring together data into one portal.
Amazing. We're looking forward to having that one-stop hub. Looks like it's going to be a lot of work. I see Patrine is smiling. She's giving you the smile. Is that a good luck with that smile, or it's something that can be done smile? Patrine, let me hear your thoughts around this, and probably tie that into what kind of collaborations you're having with the private sector, because Robin from AWS and Alice from Mozilla Corporation, they're here. They're ready to partner with Zambia, but is Zambia returning the favor to the private sector?
We really need partners to come and help us, because we want to have data straight from the school. Because sometimes the data we receive may not be the quality data and may not be the genuine data, simply because people may not have the technical know-how. How do they get this data, and how do they analyze, and how does it reach all these different levels? Because for us, we start from the school. From the school, it goes to the zone. From the zone, it goes to the district. And from the district, it goes to PO's office, to the provincial office. And from the province, that's when it comes to us, to the national. So I've seen it's a process. So I would want to be helped in this line, whereby even when I'm seated in my office, I should be able to get data for that particular school, check on the total number of enrollments, how the learners are performing in that particular school, and other information that would be needed for us to make good decisions as education. So please, partners, we really need you, because we have to invest a lot in terms of data. Currently, only a few schools are connected to internet. So we need that investment also. And again, only a few schools have the instruments, the equipments like computers, the tablets. We need that. I liked what he brought out, the one who talked about Egypt. I think that is the way to go.
Robin,
We can also to go that way as Zambia, because Zambia, we have just started enrolling the computers-based curriculum. So if they can come on board also, help us also, that the entire curriculum is put on that platform, so that everyone can easily access it and make use of that.
Patrine, what is the government approach? Because let's start there. Some governments are not that approachable, especially where private sector partnerships are concerned. Maybe there's a specific approach that Zambia can let us in on that we could get to understand, just for context purposes.
For us, we are so open, but we have to go to what he had explained earlier on. You explain, we agree how we are going to work. What is it that you are going to help us, and how are we also going to protect our data? All those are issues that we are looking at. Currently, we have even a policy on how we can look at privacy and how data can be protected. But we are so much open. That's why we are working with ADEA. So ADEA, we are looking forward that you help us, and also even the Mozilla and the team. Just come through. We can take you to our minister and the other senior government officials, then we can agree how best we can move. Because we have currently over 13,000 primary schools. There are over 13,000 schools, so we would need to have data from all these schools and on time, and analyze it so that we can make decisions just there and then. So we really need help. We still have a challenge in that area as a country. Government on its own is trying, but we cannot manage. We still need partners.
Deep insights there. And I'm thinking that probably there is some long-term plan that the government has to close some of these data gaps that we currently have. As we bring this conversation to a close, I think the one question that I would like to pose to all of us is, what would be the ideal Africa where we have functional data systems that governments can tap into to make more informed decisions?
I have an issue with the way we talk about education and EdTech, especially from an African perspective.
Right.
Because when you look at our education systems, all of it are steeped in very Western models of pedagogy. They're so Eurocentric. There's no connection to local knowledge or local systems or our everyday lives or even local languages. And you know that technology is just an enabler. So we need to start there. We need to first start by asking, what kind of education ecosystem do we want as Africans? Because the kind of education that we have right now is not African. In fact, the education system we have right now makes us hate ourselves so much that we'll fight each other for small things. We have to be careful what, our governments, encouraging our governments to partner with big tech especially, because you have to ask ourselves, the first thing I would ask any government official is, what do you want your country to look like? So my encouragement to most African governments is to first be very clear on what kind of technology you want and what kind of technology ecosystem you want in your country before you invite big tech to be your partners.
Right.
And be very clear on what kind of society we want. Because big tech comes in with hate speech, misinformation, disinformation, discrimination, racism, misogyny, all the evils.
Are we there? Are we at a point where African governments know exactly what they want for their countries?
I highly doubt it, because if you look at the pedagogy that's being used, we are not even allowed to use our own local languages. I think it's only in Tanzania. And now we can see the AES, you can see Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, they'll probably get us there. We first need to figure out our society first before we bring in technology and go, okay, here's technology. It's just an enabler. Let's find out what is it. And I'll share one example. Mozilla, for example, has a project called Common Voice. Common Voice is the largest data set of labeled human voice data, and it's available for everybody, startups, researchers, everyone. What kind of technology, what does Africa want? What does the internet look like for Africa? That's the first and most fundamental question, because the kind of internet we have right now is not African, and it's actually abusive to Africa.
Right.
So the first thing we ask is, what kind of internet, what does it look like to have a truly African internet?
Robin, I want to hear your thoughts. At what point do we get and say, okay, now we have an ideal data system that can inform government decisions where EdTech is concerned?
For starters, Africa is not one homogeneous body. In fact, we don't even sound like Africans, because this is the narrative I challenge frequently when I'm speaking to people across the outside of Africa, saying, Africa, we are going to take this initiative. Like, Africa is not one homogeneous body. Right. So, but in principle, I do agree. Governments do have to have clarity. It's said that clarity precedes focus. And so that then, having established where we need to go, and that's why myself and Madam Director aligned that we work jointly towards an intended outcome. And so when we then started having a conversation around struggling with governments to share their data, I know we've not experienced that struggle in the places that we've worked, because we work in a different way. And therefore, when we work backwards from where the customer intends to go, it is not our goal. We do not create solutions and then look for customers. We work with them towards where they intend to go. And then secondly, I think I'm an optimist by nature, right? And so when I don't think we need 100% view of data to make a decision. 60% is enough for us to start getting some clarity on the way that we need to go. And therefore, I look at some of the journeys of African governments, and I'm excited. I've been to countries within this continent where, while we speak about bringing the systems together to just get a view, we have tertiary institutions on this continent that, to the point I think Inea was talking about, learning outcomes, that are actually addressing learning outcomes, not at the end of the semester or term or whatever period, and then by then it's too late. We are about to go on holiday, then we come and restart. They are actually implemented systems where we're able to analyze this frequently and pick up trends from 3 months ago, 6 months ago, which for me is a significant leapfrog from where we were 2 years ago. Right. And for me, if we're able to then structure that in a way that says, well, look, Maybe as Africans, we are storytellers. As Africans, we love to sit around the fire. How do we then integrate what is already in place and then establish and accelerate it, as opposed to throwing out the baby with the bathwater?
All right. Okay. African parables being put into practice here. Inyang, I want to hear your thoughts, and I'll give the last word to Patrine.
This thing around African systems have really been captured. What we should look out for, which is the ideal thing. So yeah, that first point around what's the system we want to see, because you can only collect data to the outcome that you want, right? Yeah. So that you also don't end up collecting data that is of no use, right? So you set the outcomes and then you walk backwards and determine what data you need to reach that. So if we look at our continental strategies, so the African Union Continental Education Strategy for Africa is about to be released, a new one is about to be released. Can we pick that, for instance, and say, okay, or let's even look at other policies around Africa. So what is the trade policy, right? If we take the African trade policy and say, this is the country, this is the kind of trade we want to see Africa engage at, the levels of trade that we want to see Africa, then we walk backwards and say, what do we need to do in our education systems to ensure that we are having a future that ensures that we meet those needs? And then when you think about what you need within the education systems to achieve that, then you think about what data systems do we need to put in place to ensure that we are not only creating change, but we are tracking that change. We're seeing the difference. Because also we live in a very adaptive world now. Sometimes you would see that some policies are quite monolith, but we need to move from that perspective to more adaptive ways of looking at policies. And you need data to do that, because we really live in a dynamic world. Things are changing very fast, quite quickly. So you're not collecting data and keeping it for a whole year, but definitely looking for data that can help you make decisions every other, quite frequently, because changes are happening quite frequently. So let's look forward to what are our big strategy for the continent, then walk backwards to what do we need to have in our system to ensure that we're meeting those goals and achieving those goals, and then also what data do we need to ensure that we are constantly making changes in the system to ensure that we are going to achieve the results that we're looking forward to.
The issue of data is quite critical for any organization to move, or for any country to move. We really need to have systems in place of how we collect this data, how do we analyze this data, and look at the quality data. So countries should start on their own, not waiting for others to come in. So those partners, we can come, we can work together. But as a country, we need to have systems that can collect data as quickly as possible so that the data can be used for decision making. And the data should be at least accuracy and quality, because when wrong data is collected, it means even wrong decisions will be made. That's why we are talking of systems and policies to guide how data can be collected, how data can be analyzed, and how data can be disseminated. Because there's an issue again of dissemination. When you collect that data, how best do you disseminate so that all the stakeholders can get to know what is involved? Yeah, so there must be a system of how ministries can work together and with other line government ministries. For example, in Zambia, we are also working closely with the Zambia Statistical Agency. This is the agency that is taking census data. So they are also on board to help us so that we can have proper systems that can help us get data. And that data should be of quality and as close as possible to the truth so that correct decisions can be made by decision makers.
All right, thank you so much. And with that, I guess we have come to the end of our conversation with some solutions to how best we can invest in government data systems to inform decisions or inform decision-making across the continent, and especially for educational technologies. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been great having you on this conversation, and hopefully these discussions will help our governments make more informed decisions. And on EdTech Mondays, we are focused on making sure that the 10 recommendations from the EdTech Conference of 2024 that was hosted by the MasterCard Foundation are put into action this year and the years to come before 2030. My name is Joy Doreen Bira. Until the next one, bye for now.
EdTech Mondays Africa is supported by the MasterCard Foundation Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning and is part of the Young Africa Works programming.